Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. This is the A+ Tutor. Today we're going over distance and midpoint. So how to find the distance between 2 points and how to find the midpoint between 2 points. Let's look at a number line. Say we have 2 points A and B on this line. Well, the distance is going to be the number of spots in between these 2 points, but we can find this by taking the absolute value of 0.2 minus 0.1. So we take the location of 0.2 or B, which is at 7, and 0.1 or A, which is at 3, subtract those two, and that gives us the distance of our line. The midpoint is going to be the middle point on this line segment. So we do this by adding our 2 points. We'll take 0.1 and 0.2 and add them and divide by 2 to find exactly halfway between point A and point B. So in this case, we'll add 3 and 7, which is 10, divide that by 2, and we get 5. Now let's say we're looking at a coordinate plane and we have 2 points on a coordinate plane. For example, point A, which is at the point 3, 2, and point B, which is at the point 8, 8. So we can see this line segment here on the coordinate plane. To find the distance, we can't take the absolute value of 0.2 minus 0.1 because now we have an x and y. So we're going to use something called Pythagorean Theorem. Pythagorean Theorem shows a relationship between the sides of a right triangle. Basically, this theorem says a squared plus b squared equals c squared. And from that, we can determine that c is equal to the square root of a squared plus b squared. Well, if we look at our line segment that we have on our coordinate plane, we can create a triangle. A horizontal line starting at A and a vertical line starting at B gives us that right triangle. So our A line segment, or our little a, can be represented by the distance from point A to the intersection of the line at B, or our 2 x values subtracted from each other, so x2 minus x1. And our B is found the same way, where our 2 lines intersect, or y2 minus y1. So we can use this to find the distance because we can find our hypotenuse of our triangle, or that distance between our line segments, using Pythagorean Theorem. So our distance formula becomes x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared. Similarly, with our midpoint is going to be the halfway point in our line segment. So we need to find the halfway point of our x values and the halfway point of our y values. So for our x, this is simply going to be x1 plus x2 divided by 2. And for y, this is y1 plus y2 divided by 2. So we add our x values and divide by 2, and add our y values and divide by 2. Let's look at a few examples. First, let's take the example where we're given a graph with a line segment and we need to find both the distance and the midpoint. Well, based on this graph, our point A is at 2, 1, and B is at 4, 5. So 2 is x1, 1 is y1, and 4 is x2, and 5 is y2. Our distance formula is the square root of x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared. Substituting our x1, y1, x2, and y2, we get d is equal to the square root of 4 minus 2 squared plus 5 minus 1 squared. Or d is equal to the square root of 2 squared plus 4 squared, which is the square root of 4 plus 16, which is the square root of 20. And simplifying the square root of 20 gives us 2 square root 5. So our distance of this line segment is 2 square root 5 units. Next, let's find the midpoint. So our midpoint is the point x1 plus x2 over 2 and y1 plus y2 over 2. Substituting our x1, x2, y1, and y2, we get 2 plus 4 over 2, 1 plus 5 over 2, or 6 over 2, 6 over 2, which is the 0.33. So we see on our graph, if we plot 3, 3, that is right in the middle of our line segment. Let's look at another example. Again, we're given a graph with a line segment. Based on this graph, we see that A is at the point -2, -1, and B is at the point 2, 2. So let's identify our x1, y1, x2, and y2. Using the distance formula, we find D is equal to the square root of 2 minus -2 squared plus 2 minus -1 squared. Solving this gives us the square root of 2 plus 2 squared plus 2 plus 1 squared, which is the square root of 4 squared plus 3 squared, the square root of 16 plus 9, which is the square root of 25, and this is equal to 5. So the distance of this line is 5. Now let's find the midpoint. So our midpoint is x1 plus x2 over 2 and y1 plus y2 over 2. Substituting our values gives us -2 plus 2 over 2 and -1 plus 2 over 2. So we get 0 over 2, 1 over 2, or 0, 1/2 is our midpoint. Looking at our line segment, we see that that is exactly in the middle of our line segment. Let's take another example. This time, we're going to find our distance and midpoint giving 2 points and not the graph. So, first step is identifying our x1, y1, x2, y2. Plugging that into our distance formula, we get the square root of -3 squared plus -15 squared, which is the square root of 9 plus 225, which is equal to the square root of 234. 234 is equal to 9 times 26, and 9 is a perfect square, so we can write this as 3 times the square root of 26, and that is our distance. To find our midpoint, we'll use our midpoint formula, x1 plus x2 over 2, y1 plus y2 over 2. Plugging in our values gives us the midpoint of -5 over 2, 1 over 2, or -5 halves, 1/2. Let's take another example, just like this, finding the distance and the midpoint given 2 points. So our points are 5, 1, and 0, -4. Identify x1, y1, x2, and y2. Plugging these values into our distance formula, we get the square root of -5 squared plus the square root of -5 squared. This is the square root of 25 plus 25, or the square root of 50, and the square root of 50 is equal to 2 times 25, and 25 is a perfect square, so that means that our distance can be simplified to 5 square root 2. Let's find the midpoint. So our midpoint formula, x1 plus x2 over 2, y1 plus y2 over 2, we'll plug in our values and find that our midpoint is 5 halves, -3 halves. Let's look at another example, going back to having a line segment on a graph and having to find our distance and midpoint. So from our graph, we can see that our A is -1, -4, and B is 4, -1. After we identify our x1, y1, x2, y2, we can plug this into our distance formula. So we find that our distance is equal to the square root of 5 squared plus 3 squared, which is the square root of 25 plus 9, which is the square root of 34, and that cannot be simplified further. Next, let's find the midpoint. Plugging in our points, we find that our midpoint is at the point 3/2, -5/2. And we see on our line that that is exactly halfway between our two endpoints. Let's take another example, again being given 2 points rather than a line segment on a coordinate plane. Our points are -4, -7, and 7, 5. Plugging this into our distance formula, we get the square root of 11 squared plus 12 squared, which is the square root of 121 plus 144, which is equal to the square root of 265. This cannot be simplified further, so we'll leave that as is. Let's plug in our values for our midpoint. We find that our midpoint is 3/2, 1. Now, instead of finding the midpoint and the distance, let's look at an example where we are given the midpoint and an endpoint and we need to find the other endpoint. So if we're given the midpoint 10, -6, and one endpoint is -8, 10, let's find the other endpoint. So remember, our midpoint formula is x1 plus x2 over 2, y1 plus y2 over 2. So this means 10 -6 is equal to -8 plus x over 2 and 10 plus y over 2. We can separate our x and y values, which gives us 10 equals -8 plus x over 2 and -6 equals 10 plus y over 2. We want to solve for x and solve for y. So when we solve for x, we'll multiply 2 to both sides. We get 20 equals -8 plus x, add 8 to both sides, and we get 28 equals x. We'll do the same thing for y. We'll multiply 2 to both sides and get -12 equals 10 plus y. Subtract 10 from both sides, and we get -22 equals y. So our other endpoint, or our second point, is 28, -22. Let's look at another example like this. Given our midpoint is at 1, -6, and one endpoint is at 6, 9. We know that 1 -6 is equal to 6 plus x over 2, 9 plus y over 2. So breaking this up, we get 1 equals 6 plus x over 2, and -6 equals 9 plus y over 2. Let's solve for x and then solve for y. Multiply 2 to both sides. We get 2 equals 6 plus x, subtract 6, and -4 equals x. Solve for y. We multiply 2 to both sides, so -12 equals 9 plus y. Subtract 9 from both sides, and we get -21 equals y. So our other endpoint is -4, -21. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up and make sure you're subscribed. I post new videos every Tuesday and every Thursday at 1 p.m. Comment down below what other topics you'd like for me to review. See you next time.